can't cheer, but like it's a medium voice as well. So with no further ado, I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister to start the quarterfinals of the ASDC14.
One second. Okay. To make money, we think that you need to have to start with the capital to make money. In developing countries such as the Philippines and Indonesia, where when we go to school every day on a daily basis, seeing people on the streets begging for money and begging for food to even survive a day, we need to recognize that poverty is a very real problem that we face. It's not as simply as saying that I need a job and I'm going to get the job. It's the fact that your problem is if I'm going to survive the next day in that reality. Given that, we need to realize that time is of the essence in this debate. We need to make sure that these people even have the capacity to survive the day before they even go to school and make those courses happen. Government side believes in two important things. Firstly, going back, to make money, we think that you need to have the usable capacity right now to even get money in the first place. You need to have that capacity to have the money and disposable income to buy food, to buy shelter, to buy all these appliances, to make sure that you can survive and gain that income in the future. We think that poverty is not as easy as you make it seem, but I'm going to discuss that more later on. Secondly, we think that job saturation can be the death of an economy. When you have an oversupply of lawyers, doctors, and nurses in a place where the demand is simply not enough. But we need to also recognize that it's also impossible to run out of a need for blue-collar workers such as factories and factory workers and call centers. Companies can always have more factories, can always have more workers, but can always have a limit of maybe 10 lawyers, maybe 20 lawyers, right? Once they have that quota finished, they will never need more lawyers than that. We think that the goal of this debate, when we talk about alleviating poverty, is not saying that people will be able to buy diamonds, buy gold, and maybe buy all the cars that they want. But we think in this debate, that when we mean alleviating poverty, we think that we're reducing the amount of people reducing the amount of people below the poverty line. We need that people have the capacity to even survive the day, to buy food, to go to school, to make sure that they even have a comfortable life. That's the goal of this debate. Not to make everyone so rich that they have everything to buy, but to make sure that you can even stand the day and make sure they can go buy the day. I'm going to talk to you about two arguments coming from my speech. Sit down. Firstly, I'm going to talk to you about why it's so crucial, especially given the time, why we need the startup capital before we can consider these startup courses. And secondly, I'm going to talk to you about why it's so detrimental to have a saturation in the market. When you have the places such as Philippines, we have an oversaturation of nurses. People even have to buy their jobs in the first place before they can even make money, and why that's such a problem. Let's get on to the first argument now. We need to go to the very micro of the debate and look at the family unit, right? Especially in terms of poverty. Because we need to realize that poverty is not something that we can belittle. Poverty is not something that you can belittle in this debate. When you're impoverished, it means that your concern is not if I have. Your concern is not being picky about what job I have. Your concern is do I even have enough money to make sure my family survives the next week? Do I have enough money to make sure I'm going to work in the first place? That's why time is so important right now, because that's the most concern before you can make sure even any short-term or long-term policy is going to be enacted in the first place. How do you expect someone to go through a law course? How do you expect someone to go through 5 years of law before he can even make sure that they have the sustenance to go to school, before he even has the proper transportation to even go to school and make sure he has the supplies to even study properly? That's something that we need to address and consider right now. But why is this so important? So that what happens when you actually have minimum wage? We think that's how we would give the people the starting capital to circulate money, right? That's when they buy food, they start to buy appliances, they start to buy the raw ingredients, the clothes, the shelter that they need for the daily life. Why is that important? We think obviously circulating money is a good thing. Why? Because when you have that capital for the government through the tax, right? When people keep on buying and keep on spending, then that's how you have the ability to use that capital for the good of the whole nation. How? Within it now, it provides the capital for the government to say that maybe I want to make the public transportation cheaper, right? So that people can have more access to other places, right? Or maybe I have big government projects such as public infrastructure and maybe investing in tourism to make sure that everybody is in fact going to have a better life. We think that in the short term, we need to recognize that when you provide for the family unit and give them that starting capital to say that I can buy food, I can buy shelter, and I can circulate the money, then that's how you're going to keep on improving the economy. That's how you make sure that when you have that starting capital, you're going to make sure that you also fund the government because of the taxes, right? That's how you give them the money to make sure they can buy infrastructure in the first place to make each and every person have a better life. Yes.
Sir, a person who's working is minimum wage level and hardly making ends meet, please tell me how in the future he can go to a law school as you put
did?
Sir, we think that the problem is even worse on your side. We don't even have that ability to give them minimum wage in the first place. Because coming from your side, what happens is very simple, right? You tell them you go to school, and admittedly, that is in fact ideally good. But we need to realize the realistic scenario that you're going to put them under, right? Aside from giving them the concern that they have to go to school, they also have to concern if they even have food, if they can even go to school the next day, because they don't have the capacity to go there, right? That's the most concern. Because if you can't even go to school because you're so hungry and starving, and you need to make sure that your children has the baby food or the baby milk to make sure they even survive, we don't think you're going to even be able to study properly or even make sure that that job is going to be good for you, right? What's the conclusion of this argument? We think that the utmost concern right now is the short term, right? To make sure that these people have the capacity and physical capacity to even survive and begin having this kind of capital to circulate the money and better the economy. Only then can you even have that concern of those upgraded courses. Because the only way to make those sustainable is if you can survive in the first place. Let's get on to the second argument now, on the saturation of an economy. We think that, going back to our definition of alleviating poverty, the goal is to make sure that each person can survive. We need to recognize, for example, in the case of Dole, right? For example, Dole can always want more factories, right? Dole can always want more factories so that they can make more of their pineapple juice and make more of their products, right? But they will always have a limit to how many lawyers they will need. Because once they have those 10 lawyers to provide for the corporate needs and maybe for the legal needs, they will need no more lawyers, right? There's no point for them in gaining maybe 20 more lawyers or 50 more lawyers, because that's simply an oversaturation of how many ideas you can spread. But coming from our side, we need to realize that you always need more people to fill up those factories, right? You will always need more people to go into these kinds of places. Why is this so important in this debate? We need to recognize, even in the context of our home country in the Philippines, that oversaturation is a very real problem. When nurses even have to pay hospitals before they even get a job in the first place. Why is this a concern? If you're going to spend 5 years and 6 years studying and realize that you're not going to get a job in the first place in the Philippines, or maybe not even get a job in the future in another country, we think that's a very real problem, right? Because opposition relies on the assumption that these jobs will pay off, right? Opposition relies on the assumption that after your school is finished, you will get a job in the first place. And if you can't even assure a job because of oversaturation of these jobs, we don't think that's a payoff that we're readily willing to accept. We need to face the reality that these people face, right? Or the reality that these people live. They're not in a place where they can make decisions, but they need to make sure that they have the starting capacity right now to even live in the first place before they even have these kind of pressing concerns. We gladly propose.
7:10. You guys need speaking time. Speaker spoke for 7 minutes.
Second?
Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your speech. To open the case for opposition side, I'd like to call upon the Leader of Opposition. Yeah. I can look it.
Starting with the capital, to what? To do what exactly? That is the exact question we have today. We tell you that a wage for this day does not ensure that tomorrow I will have a better life or even a livable life to begin with. They come up and characterize the whole skill upgrading course to something as law school or medicine school and whatnot. We tell you that these workers necessarily do not need to take 5 years of schooling to become a doctor or a lawyer. There are specialization schools where you know how to work the world, where you know how to learn a wide range of skills. We tell you that in these schools, they even teach you how to weld properly. We tell you that in these schools, they will tell you that what is called a total quality check, and they tell you and they teach you how to implement all these policies. We tell you that to become a doctor or an engineer, these workers do not need to become doctors and engineers. Rather, a person with a wide range of skills that can survive and have better jobs and have better career opportunities. That is exactly what we tell them. They come up and told us that, you know what, at the end of the day, there is job saturations and there are no needs for more doctors or more lawyers. We tell you that no. these workers, once they become skilled, there aren't going to be the people who just flip burgers at McDonald's. We tell you that they have more options to be someone who welds in a factory. They have more option they have more options to work in a lab. We tell you that there will always be supervisions of doctors and lawyers and whatnot. But we tell you that the minimum level of jobs which are above this minimal workers levels, but below these doctors and engineers levels. We believe this skills upgrading course unnecessarily aren't law schools or medical schools and whatnot. They also came up and talked about that, you know what, the starting capital, and as they have the starting capital and they can fund the government and they'll be taxed and whatnot. These workers are not taxed to begin with. We believe their argument is hilarious because of the fact that they take it as granted that these workers, after getting a wage of $5, they'll be somehow paying taxes. Then they came up and talked about that, you know what, they need to back their families up. We tell you that these poor people already have poor family planning. They do not know how to plan their families and generally have larger families with even 4 or 5 children. We tell you to back these families up, you need to think long run. We tell you when a person is on the streets, we tell you that if there is a higher need, the company recruits him, gives him a job, provides him with the wages, and in the evening, he goes to his skills upgrading classes, or even vice versa. We tell you that at the end of the day, the status quo is absolutely brilliant because we're thinking long run, not just a piece of bread to be shared with a family of 7, and then tomorrow have no career opportunities and be exploited. But before moving on,
the amount of time it takes to become an engineer, just to make it simple, what are they going to eat?
We tell you that it's not a huge amount of time, and we are not saying that they're going to become engineers to begin with. We tell you that they need to learn many skills which are under their knowledge and they're capable of learning, such as simple as welding. We tell you that even moving on to our own arguments, right? What workers are and what develops them, and we also, Novice is also going to talk about how it helps the overall situation. So what are workers and what do they want, right? We believe that it's a debate about long term and short term, right? We tell you that wage gets them food which is barely livable. We tell you that the standard of minimum wage level is something that a person can barely survive. I won't take any other POIs. We tell you that this is the level where people can barely survive. We tell you this is a livable life to begin with. The government has a limit below which you cannot pay these workers. We tell you that this does not get them anywhere. However, these workers are also exploited. Why? Because they have trivial job to begin with, right? Gatekeeper at McDonald's or packing your burgers. We tell you that these workers do not need any skills to begin with. The company realizes they have no skills and they absolutely need to stay in my company. I can do whatever the hell I want to do with them and provide them with a minimum wage level which does not hurt me. The moment they're more skilled, the moment they are just more than someone who can just flip burgers, we tell you that these companies realize for the sake of I won't take any other POIs, for the sake of their worker turnover, they keep these workers. Why? Because once you recruit even more workers, we tell you that they need to train them, and we believe it's a big hassle for them to begin with. We tell you these workers are valued even more when they have more skills and whatnot. We tell you that they are not exploited because they realize that, you know what, I'm not just capable of flipping burgers, I'm capable of doing a lot more. We also tell you that, you know what does this coursework do? They provide you with skills they develop which will be unaffordable to begin with if they are not subsidized. Because they're expensive, we believe that. The moment they're not subsidized, these workers do not get to develop. We tell you a country which has a lot of workers and have very less white collar people, we tell you that this scenario remains the same. People do not develop, people do not have a certificate which is at least valuable in this society to get them works. We tell you that in the long run, they can preach this knowledge among their family members as well. Something your wage you cannot do, because you go back home, you teach or learn how to make something out of nothing, right? So we tell you that these people are also teaching their families which is alleviating poverty, which is far better than providing your son with a bread and telling him that, you know what, tomorrow we might not find this. Moving on from this, we tell you that, you know what, this will cause further inflation to begin with. Because if these courses were not subsidized, we tell you that they will have to be bought by these companies and whatnot. We tell you that the overall cost of production would increase because they are now incurring more costs. even moving on from that, we tell you that when a worker is not effective enough to work in a company, he's thrown away. We tell you the very moment he's skilled and he's working perfectly and is having an average cost low and is more specialized in his work, we tell you his production cost incurred because of this worker is significantly low, and that company can sell products at a lower cost. Because we tell you this, if a person sitting on the streets begging, we don't expect that person to go to a work tomorrow and then stay there. We tell you that that person is going to be fired to begin with because he has no skills and whatnot, and is going to be exploited. We also talk about that, you know what, these workers would know that, you know what, this is the minimum level of wage I'm going to get anyway. So these workers, even if they do drop their qualities, their wages is not going to be decreased. We tell you that these people would not work hard because they know that there is no point. I have a wage, and if I deteriorate my performance, there is no way of decreasing my wage. I can sue the government. We tell you, so what have we told you, right? We came up and talked about, you know what, start with a capital. And then do what next? That is the main question of the debate. We tell you that these wages give you a barely livable life to begin with. We also came up and talked about that, you know what, you necessarily do not need to go to a school which takes 5 years. You can learn a skill in 3 to 6 months and then apply it in your factory. We came up and talked about that, you know what, this prevents exploitation, and these are the reasons why we win this debate.
For 7 minutes, 14 seconds. Ready.
Thank you for your opposition. To continue the case for government side, I'd like to call upon Deputy Prime Minister.
Ladies and gentlemen, the previous speaker seems to have a misunderstanding of what specialized means. Specialized doesn't mean you're okay with everything. Specialized means you do really good at something, right? Even factory jobs are counted as minimum wage. Even factory jobs are the jobs we talked about. We're trying to present to you what they don't understand is specialized are courses that take years, right? Specialized courses are the ones that are expensive, are the ones that go into professional jobs or white-collar jobs, known as law, medicine, and engineering, and other stuff of the same nature. This is what I'm going to do as a second affirmative speaker. I'll have 5 responsive points for you today. I'll have 1 constructive when I talk about what are the driving forces of economic development. But before that, 5 levels of response. On the first level of response of job saturation, right? It brings me great sorrow that people in my own home country have to pay to work in hospitals, but even brings me more great sorrow that Negative didn't have a response to that. They never responded to the idea that you're going to increase a tremendous amount of supply for something where there is limited demand, right? Because a company like Apple will always want to build more manufacturing plants where factory workers are going to work in, but they're going to have a limited number of people who are specialized, of people who are counted as engineers, as people who are counted as, lawyers, right? Second responsive point, and this whole idea that specialization courses are not that hard and they're accessible to everyone. On the first level of response, he never gave us a definition of what a specialized course means. The most we got from them was a course that gives you a certain set of skills. We question whether that's the actual definition of specialized courses and skills. We tell you that these are the courses that are expensive, that they take long, that's why you specialize in something, right? Because you're really good at something, you're really good at one thing, but not so good and not so handy capable, not so accessible to everything, right? Because even his examples like welding counts as low-skilled jobs, right? Even skills like welding are counted on the production line of major companies, right? Or major factories. This is absurd. Third responsive point, this absurd idea on taxation. Yes, everyone gets taxed, right? Even the poor man who buys a can of sardines will get a tax on that can of sardines he bought, but the government will take 6% or 7% out of that can of sardines. This fourth responsive point on this idea of minimum wage. Let's compare, right? Because we think that minimum wage is still better off than nothing, because we think money for tomorrow is what will feed your family. It's not money in 5 years. But even on the second level, minimum wage isn't that bad, ladies and gentlemen. Minimum ensures that you can eat for 3 times a day and pay for a home, right? That's why it varies from country to country, and that's the importance and urgency of minimum wage that we want to push to you in this debate. Later, last responsive idea on this whole idea that if my father becomes a welder, I will teach my son to be a welder to begin with. Or if my father becomes an engineer, I will teach my son to be an engineer. On the first level of response, we think that's absurd, right? The path course is never definite for a person. You can't determine what job is he going to take. But secondly, that's even more absurd, right? If I become a doctor, I can't just teach my son because my son needs to go to a licensed medical school. My son needs to go to a licensed welding school, if there is such a thing like that. So no, that argument doesn't fly. You haven't presented us a single benefit why money in 5 years is so good than money for tomorrow. Later, let's go on to the substantive point, right? What are the driving forces of economic development? We think there are 3 things, and I'll analyze 2 and 3 levels. Firstly, consumption, which provides demand. Secondly, production, production, which supplies supply, which ensures supply, and lastly, investing, which just makes those two things better, which makes those two things really nice. Later. On the first level, what consumption am I referring to? I'm referring to things like spending power or the ability of your citizens to purchase goods. This happens when people have a constant flow of spendable income, right? When people have something, at least something, just to buy the most basic things like food. You get this obviously with our policy, because so what, right? What's the benefit of this thing called spending power? Spending power is good because when we talk about poverty alleviation, it also happens when we lessen the gap between income and equality, right? We call the poor under the income poverty alleviation because they can't afford basic things or they have a harder time affording these things compared to people who are rich. We then lessen that gap, or we then lessen this sort of idea of income inequality when you give the poor the ability or the spending power to purchase certain things like food, to purchase things like shelter. Sure, it doesn't make everyone in that country rich. Sure, it doesn't make everyone in that country be able to afford diamonds and golds, but at least we lessen that gap, right? When people have a constant flow of income that they can spend on the most basic things, because that's what we're trying to do, because that's our definition of poverty alleviation today. When people get above that poverty line, but even on the second lesson where you lessen the economic inequality. Later, let's tackle the second idea on the level of production. Given that we've proven to you that spending power is good when you have a sustainable business models where small businesses can continue producing because they have people to buy, right? Because if grocery can continually selling food when people have the money to buy food, even wet markets can continually produce food even when people can buy. What is then the need for production? We would rather than prefer low-skilled workers or people on the manufacturing line because they can sustain that demand, or they can sustain that demand for production, right? These are low-skilled workers who work in manufacturing. These are low-skilled workers who work in production. When we necessarily create that demand for consumptions, we can also supply that with low-skilled workers. People work in manufacturing, and we think that's better off because that provides people with jobs. And secondly, that provides people with more income. Before that, any points?
Sir, please tell me why how and why these workers who are living by a minimum wage can get above the poverty line. They're hardly finding food, as you put it.
Sir, if there's no minimum wage law on our side, what are they going to get as wages, right? What you're assuming is, how can a person go to law school or med school if he does not have the money to pay for a bus? How can he go there, even if his tuition fee is subsidized? What food is he going to bring for lunch at that school, right? You have to understand the real means of poverty alleviation is that people are sustainable, right? Even if that sustainable idea is not what you prefer when everyone is specialized, at least it gets people by the day, right? Last level of analysis, investments. What do investors look forward to? Because since we're talking about development of poverty alleviation, investors are something we need to talk about. One of the things is they look for is production. We've told you how we supply production on our side. When you have that means of producing things, when you have low-skilled workers who work in manufacturing, who are counted as cheap labor. But secondly, investors look for things that are less risky. Investors look for things that are not a risk to their money, right? What they look for is a sustainable economy where people have money to spend tomorrow and people won't eventually just get money in 5 years. What is then the conclusion here? We think it's our side who is able to utilize this more. It is our side who can build industries and employ more people, right? When you do get that stream of investors, because you have production and because you have a sustainable economy. It's even on our side where we have better courses or better schools, right? When you get that slow trickle down in investors, that's when we can provide more people. That's when we can provide better specialized courses to people. If the idea was providing specialized courses, right? It's when you get companies like like Google who outsource their companies. That's also a way for us to improve our specialized jobs, because obviously they'll be better or there'll be more companies supplying those jobs. So what were the problems that we answered coming from affirmative bench? Firstly, we answered the idea that we need to sustain people on the short-term run as well when it comes to people being able to buy food with minimum wage. Secondly, we supplied this idea of economic growth when you talked about making sure you have a production line, making sure that people have spending power to consume, and making sure that investors have an actual incentive to invest. But thirdly, we talked about this idea of job saturation that they're going to create on side negative, which they still have failed to respond to. For all those reasons and more, we're proud to propose.
Please focus 7 minutes, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Speaker, for your speech. Now I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue.
Yes.
So basically, the proposition side's case has been entirely about how we need a short-term benefits and short-term idea to solve the economy, right? They basically continue to say that there is job saturation and that long-term policies will eventually fail because people do not have food in their mouths. They present an extreme picture that every single citizen inside the country who is not below the poverty level is going to die the next day because they does not have food, ladies and gentlemen. You need to understand that when firms finally see that they have a more skilled worker base, these skilled workers are far more valuable to firms, and so they can negotiate a higher salary for them, for themselves every single time they negotiate with the firm. It's because these workers can tell their firm owners that if you don't give me the salary, I will go down to the next firm who will give me the salary. It's because when Bangladesh developed skilled worker base for IMG unions, at that point of time, there was more international investment in multinational companies that set up in the country that led to a greater amount of workers being employed. So eventually, we see that team proposition simply has no idea outside of the country of Philippines. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, the idea of minimum wage, like securing more food. Understand that simply because you say that minimum wage, people are going to die because if without minimum wage, you cannot give a piece of bread to your child, ladies and gentlemen, does not ensure that he goes to school the very next day. You need to understand that to break down the cycle of poverty, you need to make sure that these people do not need food, do not only harp on the idea of food, ladies and gentlemen, rather they aspire to greater things. Why is India's middle class developed to such an extent that they are moving into greater social status? It's because of the fact that these people, ladies and gentlemen, have been developed and have been educated to a point where they know their rights, where they know how to be more skilled. At that point of time, they're asking for more money because they are more skilled and higher worker base. Why is the amount of minimum wage in USA so much higher than in Bangladesh? It's because the worker base is so much higher, ladies and gentlemen, so much more skilled. So the worker base knows it can ask for more money because at the end of the day, they will be given more money to keep them inside the job in the very first place, ladies and gentlemen. On a fourth level, ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand the concept of vindictive firms. What do firms look for? They look for more and more profits, ladies and gentlemen. Look for a greater profit line. How do they get a greater profit margin? By making sure that they give the great profit line. So basically, when you give minimum wage to these workers, the amount of cost per unit of product produced goes so much higher. What does this mean? That the firms are forced to lay off workers and fire workers because at the end of the day, they cannot afford to keep on the workers in the very first place. What does this mean, ladies and gentlemen? That the amount of employment in the country goes down that much higher because the firms cannot afford to keep the workers. Now, what happens when you give them skill upgrading courses? When you give them skill upgrading courses, at that point of time, they become more skilled and the firms are ready to invest more and more because they see that the average cost of production per good will decrease so much more and they can compete with the international firms. Fourth, the idea of investors, the second speaker brought up. Talk about how this investor will be discouraged because they see that the workers simply cannot get food enough and they cannot get enough food. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you back my idea of the last point. They're encouraged because they see that the more skillful worker base to invest upon. When they know that their investor base that they invest upon is so much more skilled that they can give them the necessary ability of these firms to compete in international markets with companies from China, with companies from England, with companies from Germany, ladies and gentlemen. At that point of time, they're encouraged to invest more. And investors in the economy obviously mean that the economy is going to improve. And at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, the more firms there are, the more investment there is going to be more and more poverty reduction inside the country. Because at the end of the day, the poverty will reduce the more number of workers that are hired, ladies and gentlemen. Fourthly, they have a very strange idea of how poverty can be eradicated. They think about the short term, that they're going to give food and they're going to give clothing, and that is how poverty is going to be eradicated. Ladies and gentlemen, understand that as long as the poverty is not eradicated at a very basic level of people receiving education and people knowing how to have different vocational courses and people knowing which place to better invest in, at that point of time, they will never be able to sustain themselves and never be able to ask for greater amount of money and for greater amount of stuff, right, ladies and gentlemen? Fourthly, what are the driving forces of economic growth, right? Ladies and gentlemen, talk about the driving forces of economic growth because we talk about how the firm's perspective, right? You need to understand that these firms are going to want greater amount of profits, and this greater amount of profits will never be ensured unless there is a more skilled worker base and a more skilled worker force, ladies and gentlemen. Fourthly, when you talk about this company and how these companies, how these workers are going to be benefited, ladies and gentlemen. We talk about exactly why these workers will want greater wage levels, will want great wage levels at the end of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, the incentive to work hard and incentive to improve your station inside the world increases when you know that there is a future for you. Once the future has been taken away, once the desire for the hunger for becoming a better citizen, becoming a better person, and giving food to your family goes away, that kind of time you never want to improve your station in society. The masses can be appeased by making sure that they get food in their belly release for the next one month. However, you need to understand the masses have to eradicate poverty in the masses. You need to make sure that they can ensure food to their children for the next 1 till 20 years. They implement.
Sure.
Fourthly, we talk about the idea of how there is a difference between which jobs are very famous at the first level. For example, in the years of 2000-2005, Bangladesh had a very active jute industry, ladies and gentlemen. In that time, there were a lot of people working in the jute industry of Bangladesh. In 2006, the industry crashed down, and all the workers who were not skilled had to go away from the jute industry, and they were unemployed. Right now, the R&D sector is so much more useful, and people inside the R&D sector are very skilled at it. However, they do not have any other skills because they only have a minimum wage, but they do not have vocational skill courses that can eventually prepare them for an outcome which will eventually lead to them not being able to work harder, like ladies and gentlemen, to get more jobs. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, when they do not have the ability to do more jobs, at that point of time, they do not have the ability for economic downturns, they do not have the ability to counter economic problems, ladies and gentlemen, which eventually lead to them dying down. Moving on to the constructive today's house, what do we believe is the solution before moving on, yes, sir?
Alright, we've had 2 sets of rebuttals from 2 different speakers, but we still don't have a rebuttal to my good friend here. How many lawyers does a company need?
Sir, you need to understand that this is not the only thing that we're talking about. White-collar jobs are not the only thing that you specialize in. The ability to weld, the ability to make a computer chip, ladies and gentlemen, because you know and you are given the technology to do so, is the most important thing that a worker has to do in an Apple production firm. Being a lawyer is the end of the world simply because Team Philippines wants to be doctor and lawyer at the very first place. You need to understand the very basic necessity. Team Operation comes up and tells you that give these workers the ability to weld and the ability to do 3 jobs at one time, and they can take courses and become better citizens and become better production workers. Fourthly, you need to understand that these workers, ladies and gentlemen, can take online vocational classes, can take vocational courses, ladies and gentlemen, after they have done with their work. So at the end of the day, we believe there is no problem with them doing the same jobs and doing this taking vocational courses at the very end of the day. Fourthly, you need to understand the short term, the economy never benefits, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because the economy stays stagnant. Every single country develops, while those countries with minimum wage simply stay at the very place where they only focus on providing food to their people, right, ladies and gentlemen? However, at the end of the day, providing food is the very main alternative for an economy. It's a matter of law of hierarchy, right, ladies and gentlemen? You eventually want more things as you grow and more get more and more richer, ladies and gentlemen, and more able to sustain themselves. At the end of the day, we see no ability for the workers to sustain themselves beyond giving food to their families for 1 hour of the day, ladies and gentlemen. We see that Team Philippines comes up and they completely destroy the very concept of greater meritocracy and greater desire to work for oneself. Team Summerfield clearly wins. Thank you.
Please focus on it. 15 seconds.
I thank you, Speaker, for your speech. Throughout the last constructive speech of the government side, I'd like to call upon the government
You can't hunger for more if you have hunger now. The deputy told us that, well, if they keep their hunger on for a month, well, they'll be able to keep that hunger away for 20 years. I don't think he knows how the human stomach works, right? Generally, people need food now. They're better press their needs right now. While we do think it's generally a good idea to make sure that our people are studying, to make sure that people are skilled, if that is infeasible, then that is not a policy that we can go through. I'm going to look at this economics debate from 2 things, right? From the bigger scale on macroeconomics, and secondly, the smaller scale of micro. But firstly, let's go on to the bigger scale of micro. Firstly, let's go to the deputy's argument. Except he had none, hear about it for 7 minutes. So moving on, let's go on to what he said. He told us that, well, specializing in things can mean things like welding, can mean things like making a computer chip. First level response, Mr. Speaker, even making a computer chip takes 5 years of computer technology. Trust me, I've looked this up. Even things like that, anything that gives you a special skill, generally means that you may need more time. If it's just something that only needs 1 month, generally that means that skill isn't so special, right? We think that they have to be fair here. If they're trying to tell us that the class no thank you can only last for a week or something, there isn't any debate. Secondly, even then, even if they can go through that, and even if it only takes 1 week, then what's the difference exactly, right? Even then, you're still on the production line welding, your wage still isn't that high. Where's the long-term amazingness that you still see if you're still on the production line at the day? No, thank you. And thirdly, this is what's important here. Even if we accept their characterization, our arguments still work. If they try to accept our characterization, they don't have any arguments, right? They don't have any characterization that no thank you. They don't give any leeway to bite into the characterization that these jobs can take months and months, but we still tell you that even if a job only takes, even if a special skill only takes a week, our arguments still work, and I'll show you why. First point. They told us that, well, a minimum wage is not livable. Mr. Speaker, the bare definition of minimum wage is the fact that it's livable, right? The reason why it changes from country to country is because the standard of living in one country is different from the standard of living in others, right? In Bangladesh, it might only take 5 ringgit to give you a proper meal, but in the US, it might need 20 ringgit for a burger and things like that. That's why it's different. The definition of the minimum wage is the fact that you're above the poverty line to make sure that you have every basic need out there. Things like shelter, things like food, things like making sure that people can go to public school at the end of the day. That's why we don't see any backing to our accusation that if you're in the minimum wage, you're going to be that poor. First level response. This is where Prime Minister came in. He told you that you need startup capital, which also goes to government, which goes on and improves that economy, right? If I am a government, I cannot make the economy go forward. I cannot even build the schools that they want if I don't have the money in the first place to actually build those schools, to pay those constructors to get those schools up and running, right? If they want to even get to the long term, they're going to need those minimum wage jobs. They're going to need to make sure that you have the startup capital ready there to make sure that anything long-term is even feasible in the first place. Secondly, we gave you another argument, right? Coming from my deputy, he gave you the idea of investor confidence. He gave you the idea that investors generally want a place where they can get money tomorrow, where people can buy their products right now because they have a wage coming in, so that investors can go on there, right? If you want a long-term, we're giving you the same thing as well. We're giving you the idea of startup capital, and the idea that in the long term, in 5 years, all those taxes adds up, and your economy also goes better, right? We gave you the idea of investor confidence from the private sector, in which case companies would go in and also give more money to the government in the long term, right? They seem to mischaracterize it here. We're not just talking about the short term. We're telling you that if you utilize the powers of the short term, you gain the feasibility to get to the long term. You gain the feasibility to operationalize the benefits that you get from the long term. Third level response. We don't see how the long term can do anything if people can't even go through those schools in the first place, right? We keep on asking you this. In those 6 months of training to even be a welder, in those 5 years of being a computer chip productionist, which is their own example, then you still need something to eat in those 5 years, right? You still need money to get to that school. You still need money to pay the bus to get to the school. You still need money to get textbooks to learn how to make computer chips, right? Even if we agree, being a computer chip specialist, having lots of those seems like a nice thing. We don't see how you can do that if you can't last those 5 years, if you can't last those 6 months. Next, no thank you. They told us that, well, investors go to places with skilled workers. Firstly, generally, if investors are going for skilled workers, it's not that likely that they'll go to a developing country for people like lawyers, for people like medicine, for people like doctors, for people who make something as intricate as computer chips, right? We don't see any reason why this is something that we want in the context of being a developing country. But secondly, we told you that investors want steady money, right? While they want skilled workers, if they don't have those skilled workers now, they're not going to invest in you. No, thank you. Because those investors know that right now, in the meantime, while I'm waiting for the skilled workers, no one's going to be able to buy my products because the people in this country don't have the money to even buy my products in the first place. No, thank you. Next, let's go into the next idea on the micro level, right, on the smaller scale. No, thank you. They told us, the Leader of Opposition told us that, well, workers will be complacent because they know that their wage can go down. First level response. Mr. Speaker, there is such a concept in economics, there's such a concept in jobs, it's called firing someone. Why would you be complacent in a job that gives you your food, that makes sure that your children can go to school, if you know that same complacency is the same thing that can fire you, is the same thing that can make you starve for the rest of your life because you can't get that job because you're complacent. Also, there's such a thing as positive incentive, right? Because this is the thing, even in minimum wage jobs, you still have an incentive to get more. Because even in minimum wage jobs, even if you're unskilled, you can still go up ranks, right? For example, even if I don't do anything, even if I just got out at grade school, if I go on and become an unskilled worker in a place like the production line, if I do good, I know that I can become a foreman. I know that I can become someone who might be something better than that. The idea that we need to take from this debate is this: that we need to remember that while ideas may seem nice, while the long term might seem nice, the debate isn't whether or not the long term is such a great thing. The debate is where we can get that long term to become reality. The debate is where we can make sure that those long term benefits are actually realistic and feasible. And we see that this can only happen when you have the startup capital, when you have those investors, and then you don't make sure that your workers go to school for 6 months without eating anything. That's not how stomachs work. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud in being more realistic. I'm proud to propose.
716.
Alright. So at the last constructive speech of the House, I'd like to call upon the opposition.
Yeah.
Giving the time. Ladies and gentlemen, team proposition needs to understand the difference between eradicating poverty and making people survive just by the days. Ladies and gentlemen, just because you can buy your food doesn't mean you are above the poverty line. You're above the poverty line when you can make your free choices and you have that financial capability to go ahead and buy an extra food if you want some. It's a capability of buying a 4th meal in a day if you're hungry, ladies and gentlemen. We do not want these people to stay there, eat 3 times a day, just barely, and just be happy about it. We want them to be able to have that idea and have that confidence to go ahead and buy an extra meal a day, ladies and gentlemen, and that is where they fall down. Moving on, they came up and talked about, they tried to squirrel the case to such extent that it is completely ridiculous. They think anything except white-collar jobs are not skilled courses. That is completely utter ridiculousness from team proposition and a very narrow ball on their side. They came up and talked to us about money comes with money and tax when you buy a can of sardine. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that these poor people do not have that money to buy a specialized can of sardine to begin with. They go ahead and buy cheaper price foods, that is rice, that is vegetables, and that is lentil. And they do not have the tax involved in these necessary items to begin with. Vegetables do not have taxes, and hence we see tax do not come just because you have small jobs. And then their point falls. They came up and talk about job saturation. We tell you that doesn't happen because the main characterization from their side is wrong. Then they came up and talked to us about survival. Ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the example of corporate workers. Corporate workers, we see, go to do a job 9 to 5, then goes to a school at 6, right? If they can do it, I believe these workers can work 9 to 5 and then go for a school. They can go and enhance their skills, ladies and gentlemen. And there we see that they have the earning, and also because it is subsidized, they can now afford these skill courses. And then and there, ladies and gentlemen, we see them improving and having a better life in the future. Now let's move on to a best case, worst case scenario, right? Under their best case, these people barely live off their money, have food, and just go to sleep every day knowing that I have to work my ass off the next day to just get some amount of food into my stomach and into my family's stomach, right? That is their best case scenario. So what is the worst case scenario from team opposition here? Under our worst case scenario, these workers have to suffer for 6 months to 1 year to learn a special skill, right? There, ladies and gentlemen, and after that 1 year or 6 months, these guys can move on to better sectors where they can get better payments, and in return they can make their family, they can give their family a better life, right? Then and there we see our worst case is way better than their best case scenario, ladies and gentlemen. And the very purpose of this debate was to eradicate poverty, right? And to bring people over the poverty line, not taken, sir. And they fail to show the very utility of this debate, why we should actually, how and why their model actually gets these people away from the poverty line, right? And then and there we see their main purpose falling. And moving on, they came up and talked to us about how, not taken, sir. They came up and talked to us about how welding needs 5 years to learn. That is ridiculous, number one. Number two, they come up and talk about making a computer chip or making a computer takes 5 years. That is ridiculous, because you do not need to be an engineer to assemble a computer. The engineers design the computer. These workers simply assemble it, ladies and gentlemen. That is why we see Tata having workers who specialize in assembling the car, and high-paid engineers who design the car, ladies and gentlemen. And that is where we see skill sets. This set of workers are skilled at the blue-collar jobs, that is assembling a car or packing something up. And then and there, ladies and gentlemen, we see specialization is not only about engineering or law or doctor. It is about knowing what you are doing. Not taken, sir. Moving on, they came up and talk about survival capability. Ladies and gentlemen, We believe that even under our model, they can survive because they can keep a job and because they have a subsidy they can learn. And even if we believe that it is hard to survive, we believe it is worth paying that price because after that 6 months, you have a way better life, ladies and gentlemen. Even if you have a hard life for 6 months, it's worth it because you make better 50 years, ladies and gentlemen, before I move on. Yes, sir.
We gave leeway to your characterization, right? We have two different characterizations and we gave you an even if. What's your even if? What if it does take 5 years to make a computer chip?
Sir, we are not trying to make engineers which will take 5 years. We are trying to give these workers skill development courses which is 6 months to 1 year. Then they fail to engage our very case. Moving on. They came up and talked to us about cycling money. What cycling money? I get paid $1 an hour. What do I circle around in the society? I don't have money to circle around to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. Their point fails again. They come up and talk to us about government needs taxes and foods and whatnot to pay for hospital. What taxes? I earn an hour, $1 an hour. I work 2 shifts a day to earn $16 a day. What do I give to tax? 6 cents? Even if I understand that they pay taxes, what do I give? 6 cents? $1? How is that significant for this government to develop, ladies and gentlemen? Their case falls once again. Then comes the idea of reducing people like below the poverty line. They completely fail to show us how these people are rising above the poverty line, right? We came up and told you how. We have a government side. Let's look at a scenario where there's a government, a country's government, which doesn't decide based on what will happen to the society 20 or 50 years later. They decide on what will happen tomorrow. What happens then? Then we have a country of complete chaos where there is no order, no development, and no sustainable benefit that we are trying to propose, ladies and gentlemen. And that is what Team Proposition has tried to do. They have gone on and shown us how this might be beneficial for the current day and tomorrow, but they completely fail to show us how this will benefit the society 10 years later. They completely fail to engage on the point of the future, ladies and gentlemen. We care about the future. We stand in this house today for the future generation, for a better life for the whole society, ladies and gentlemen. So what has happened in the debate today? I have come up and shown you how their best case scenario is worse than our worst case scenario, ladies and gentlemen. Under our worst case scenario, people suffer for 6 to 1 year, 6 months to 1 year, and work very hard, have to work 16 hours a day, maybe for a year or maybe for 6 months. But under their best case scenario, we see, ladies and gentlemen, that these people do not rise above the poverty line, which was the main purpose of this debate, and their very idea falls. Then they came up and talked about tax and money. We came up and showed you how that is not true in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. So with all that, we believe that we have broken down every single thing they have shown in the debate, and we believe every single point of Team Opposition stands. This debate goes to Team Opposition. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
And then the debate for opposition side, I'd like to call upon the reply speaker.
Students nowadays go for evening MBA, right? They go to evening schools, have an MBA degree, and then still go to jobs. We tell you that this is possible, and people already do that. Work few hours of the day, and then have the money, the exact minimum wage they're talking about, and then go learn a skill. We have talked about a lot of things, right? We came up and talked about that the efficiency of these workers and how it increases. This side of the house never engaged with that. They only engaged with the argument that, you know what, minimum wage is livable and they need food. We came up and talked about that they will get food because they get in the job and get in the school as well. They came up and also talked about that, you know what, these schools are all engineering schools, these schools are all medicine schools and whatnot. We came up and talked about that, you know what, at the end of the day, there are schools which specialize you in tattooing a person, in piercing a person, right, in entrepreneurship. We tell you that when these people have their own enterprises and go and take skilled courses, we tell you that they're still better off than a worker who just puts, shoves in clothes in a packet, right? We tell you that these are still better workers and they still have a tomorrow. We tell you, we also came up and talked about the worker exploitation. We came up and talked about that, you know what, a person having no skills has no significance in the country, in the company to begin with. We came up and talked about that the company doesn't care about him and the company at any point will let him go. We came up and we told you that, you know what, once they're skilled, once they know that they're valuable and once the company values them, we tell you that they can work better and the worker exploitation does not happen. happen. Something this side of the house could never come up and talk about. Even if we believe that, you know what, minimum wage is better than our policy, we tell you that this is the scenario where they get exploited, and this is the scenario where their efficiency is zero to begin with. We also came up and talked about what it does to the efficiency, right? We came up and talked about the overall cost of production falling down, and therefore there is low inflation, right? This side of the house could never come up and engage with that. They came up and asked for an even if argument, right? That even if it takes 5 years to become a doctor or engineer, which came from a POI to begin with, we tell you that even if they become doctors somehow magically, we tell you that there are always job opportunities, because the more job pools you have, the more people you have, you can select the best, and people already migrate as well. So we also told you, they came up and talked about that, you know what, even if it's just 2 weeks, what does that person do? And how is it, even if it's for 6 months, what happens to the person in his job? We tell you, the person goes to the job in the morning, applies what he has learned last night, and his efficiency overall is increased. They also came up and talked about that, you know what, they need a usable capacity. We came up and talked about this usable capacity is for nothing to begin with. We tell you that a bread you share with 7 people in your family or 8 people in your family is not enough. You need to pass something on. You want your son to be something more than what you are. We tell you this is exactly something which is possible under our scenario. They came up and talked about that, you know what, these people, they came up and talked about specialization can only happen in those white collar jobs. We came up and talked about that that's not true. They came up and talked about that there is need of constant flow of income in the society. We came up and talked about tax-free shops with these poor people, and their consumption is generally low. These rich people who pay hundreds and thousands of tax every year. We tell you that there is no circle of consumption to begin with. They came up repeatedly came up and talked about the surviving the day. We talk about surviving their lifetime. We came up and talked about surviving with their family. Because at the end of the day, they need to have a significance in their company. They need to know that, you know what, if I lose my job today, tomorrow I will get another job because I'm specialized in doing a multiple range of works. Because they know that, you know what, the economy is uncertain and they might lose their job tomorrow. These people need to know, and these people need to be skilled in various sectors. We came up and talked about that, you know what, there are training costs these companies will incur if these are not subsidized. Something this side of the house never talked about, and how it contributes to the overall inflation of a nation. We came up and talked about how they can pass these skills on to the community, something they cannot do, which is with their wage. And because of these reasons, and because our arguments were touched, we win the debate.
Yeah. Alright, to end the quarterfinals of ASDC 2014, I'd like to call upon the government replies.
As an incoming high school senior, it would bring me great joy that if there's a 6-month course in a developing nation that would help me build microchips for Apple and I'd get a high-paying salary after that 6 months. But sadly, I'm still sad because I know that that characterization does not exist in reality. I know that that's not the definition of a specialized course. These are the things that will make side affirmative win this debate, right? Because we think side negative lacked one, an actual counter-proposal that will work in society. 2, an actual working definition of what they mean by specialized courses, because we took the even if response. That even if it takes 6 months for me to learn how to build a microchip for Apple, those 6 months would be held. Thirdly, we think they lacked an evolution of response, right? Because they were incredibly dismissive to our arguments. They were incredibly dismissive to our best case and worst case scenario. This reply will happen on 2 levels. Firstly, on the fulfillment of burden, and 2, on the idea of feasible characterizations. Because what's the point of all of our principles if you cannot operationalize this outside the debate room, outside our debating tournament, right? Let's tackle the first idea, the fulfillment of burdens. What did both sides have to prove, right? We had to prove alleviation or poverty alleviation on 2 levels. Firstly, on the short-term level, and secondly, on the long-term level. What did we tell you, right? We took the even if response. Even if we were to believe that there was a 6-month specialized course for people, those 6 months would be held because you wouldn't be able to pay rent, because you wouldn't be able to bring lunch to work because you don't have money to pay for your lunch, that you wouldn't be able to go to work because you don't have money to spend on the bus. They never operationalized to their model to how these people are going to be able to balance going to an engineering school or going to an architectural firm while at the same time pay for their basic necessities because they don't have minimum wage. At least we told you that minimum wage will let you get by from your day to day. Sure, minimum wage will not give you the luxurious life, but minimum wage will give you the livable life. So what did we tell you about the long-term benefit and how even if we've proved it to you that we have the short-term benefit, what's our long-term benefit? Our long-term benefit was that we create a sustainable economy where you have consumption because of spending power, where you have production because of cheap labor, and lastly because of things like incentivizing investments. What did they tell you, right? Their long-term benefit was that people can always demand for more wages, right? They can always sue their firms, they can always sue their economic firms, and they can always ask from their governments. We told you that that was not feasible. If it was that easy to get higher wages, then everyone in the world would be happy with their salaries, then everyone in the world wouldn't have a concept of minimum wage. We simply proven to you that this wasn't likely, and the analysis was simply not likely, that the analysis was simply too dismissive. Secondly, we also told you that the long term happens when you have the short term benefits of workable capital, when you have usable capital, when your government can tax people and then use that tax for welfare and aid. Lastly, we told you the actual even if response, right? That even if that we told you that you actually get better courses on our side when you're able to trickle down the flow of better investors, of better companies be built up in your developing nation. It's actually on our side where courses get more specialized. It's actually on our side where you have better specialized courses by incentivizing investments, by incentivizing people to build schools, to build corporations in your economy because your economy is sustainable, because people actually have money to spend. Second reply issue, this whole idea of feasible characterizations, and this is how I weigh the best and worst case scenarios. They told us that investors will look for people who are specialized in developing countries, assuming that 6 months will make you incredibly specialized for Apple to take an interest in you. Firstly, if you're going to talk about that characterization, that only happens in developed countries, right? Where people are mostly specialized. We're working in a context where poverty is a big problem in developing nations. But secondly, what investors actually look forward to is high means of production with cheap labor and low-skilled workers. Secondly, a sustainable economy where people can actually afford to buy things like food, to pay for things like rent. We actually told you that what's feasible to happen in society is this idea of job saturation. She got no response from negative or no working response. The best they told us is that, no, that won't happen. That was their only dismissive response to that point. They never directly responded to it. Lastly, we told you that our worst case scenario is that people have actual salaries to live out their day, right? That was our worst case scenario, right? But we think that's still better than their best case scenario. Their best case scenario was that, no, after 1 year, after a couple of years, you will have like some sort of job, even if it means paying the cost of ulcers, paying the cost of dying from starvation. We think it's a side affirmative for obviously wins. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for the debate. Please cross the floor, shake hands, leave the room. And I'll thank you.
Speech,
Thank you for taking the